Welcome and thank you so much for checking out my poster with some early results from an upcoming paper on memory effects in online panel surveys. It's a joint work by myself, Tobias Rettig, Struminskaya and Annelies Blom. In longitudinal surveys, we commonly want to repeatedly ask the same questions to the same respondents at certain time intervals to observe change over time. Whenever we do that, we usually assume that respondents undergo the full cognitive response process for each question each time we ask it. But what if respondents instead recognize the question, remember that it's been asked before, and retrieve their previous response from their memory? This would potentially result in a form of measurement error, commonly referred to as memory effects. This issue has gained renewed interest from researchers in recent years. However, most studies to date have looked at memory effects within the course of a single survey, so question repetitions after a very short time, which is relevant to things like multi-trait, multi-method designs or pre-test, post-test experiments. However, we don't really know at this point whether memory effects could also be an issue in longitudinal panel contexts where questions are repeated after a longer time interval. This is the knowledge gap that we are aiming to fill with this study by investigating how well respondents can recall their responses after a time of 4 months or 2 panel waves later. And to also investigate, are there any differences for different types of information being recalled, meaning different types of questions? We will be looking at beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And we're also looking to find out whether there are any differences across different groups of respondents. So do memory effects systematically vary across different sociodemographic groups, across experienced and less experienced panelists, or across respondents who use different devices to answer an online survey? And to answer these questions, we implemented a survey experiment in 2 waves of the German Internet Panel, or JIP for short, which is a probability-based online panel of the German population living in private households, ages 16 to 75 years at the time of recruitment. We implemented our experiment in wave number 38, which was the November 2018 wave, and in wave number 40 in March of 2019. So these 2 waves were 4 months apart, and with 1 wave in between, which was the January 2019 wave. At the beginning of the November 2018 wave, each respondent received 2 questions on environmental issues, deemed the test questions here. These questions were randomly selected to be either on beliefs, along the lines of how likely will saving energy actually help prevent climate change, in your opinion, on attitudes, meaning how willing would you be to reduce your energy consumption in order to prevent climate change, or on behaviors, along the lines of how often do you already watch your energy consumption in order to actively prevent climate change. 4 months later, in March 2019, respondents received a set of follow-up questions for each of the test questions. First, the original test question was shown to them again, and they were asked, in November, we asked you this question, can you recall your response to it, yes or no? If respondents alleged that yes, I can recall my response, they were asked to repeat it. If respondents alleged that they could not recall their response, they were asked to give us their best estimate. And finally, respondents were asked how certain they were about having recalled their answer correctly. Now I should note that half of all respondents had already received the same set of follow-ups at the end of the same wave, rather than 2 waves later. For a different experiment, we will not be looking at results from that today, but we are controlling for it in all our analyses. Now, because each respondent received 2 test questions and 2 sets of follow-ups, we will be looking at data of 7,535 observations of 3,772 respondents. So what are our results? First, we find that if respondents said, no, I cannot recall my response, about a quarter of the time they still picked their previous response correctly, meaning they picked the exact same scale point on an 11-point scale. This is our baseline for stable opinion or correct guessing, meaning correct repetitions due to chance or due to the underlying information remaining unchanged. Now, if respondents said, yes, I can recall my previous response, they were significantly more likely to actually correctly pick their previous response. This happened in about a third of cases. And we take this as evidence that some respondents are indeed able to correctly recall their previous response even after a time of 4 months or 2 panel waves later. Also, cases where respondents first said, yes, I can recall my response, and subsequently correctly repeated it account for just over 10% of all cases. Looking at correlates of correct recalls in a multiple logistic regression model revealed that responses to attitude and behavior questions were more likely correctly recalled than beliefs, so memory effects differ by question type or by type of information that is being recalled. We also find that extreme responses, meaning cases where respondents had picked an endpoint of the response scale, were more likely correctly recalled. However, we find no differences in correct recalls across sociodemographic groups, meaning gender, age, or education levels. We don't find any differences by respondents' self-reported response burden or survey enjoyment, by their level of panel experience, across different devices or across respondents who switch devices between waves versus those who use the same device in both waves. And also we don't find any difference for the actual time between their participation in both waves, which depending on when during the month respondents participated could be anywhere from 91 to 150 days, and on whether or not respondents participated in the in-between wave in January 2019. Though I should note both this time between panel waves and the participation in the in-between panel wave were self-selected by respondents. So, in conclusion, we have seen that in a longitudinal setting, some respondents can recall their previous responses from a previous wave even after 4 months. We've seen that this varies across question types and is more pronounced for extreme responses. However, we have not found any evidence for a systematic variation of memory effects across different sociodemographic groups, different levels of panel experience, or respondents who use different devices to participate in the survey. And with that, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be happy to take any feedback or questions you may have.